Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 354, and today's guest is Paul Morville, co-founder and CEO of Parrot AI. This episode was recorded live at Startup Boston Week at Suffolk University. I recorded 2 episodes at this year's event, so stay tuned for the second episode in a couple of weeks. Paul is a serial entrepreneur, and as you'll hear from our podcast, he is very successful, but likes to fly under the radar. Case in point, while most companies can't wait to broadcast a round of funding, I couldn't find any press releases or media coverage about any outside investment for Parrot AI. Come to find out, the company did raise capital in 2021 from Accomplice, Pillar, Legion Capital, and others. We discussed his reasoning as to why they decided against announcing funding, which is very interesting. Parrot AI is not just a meeting recorder, transcription, and note-taking tool. It is an AI-powered collaborative workspace that turns conversations into results because of its understanding of the full context of a business. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics, like the 2 biggest lessons learned while building multiple companies, Paul's background story, and his work on building Barron's online property, which was one of the first financial websites, his professional journey as a product manager, including experience at Arbor Networks, and how so many people have gone off to start other companies like Twilio, the founding story of Confer, which was one of the first endpoint security solutions in the cloud that was acquired by Carbon Black, which later went public and was subsequently acquired by VMware, his decision to pass on an opportunity to join a VC firm and continue down the entrepreneurial path, all the details about Parrot AI and how it differentiates itself from competitors, what makes a great product manager, and so much more. Okay, quick side note. If you are listening to this podcast, then it is highly likely that you are interested in the founder journey and lessons learned around building companies. So please make sure you don't miss any future episodes by subscribing to the VentureFizz podcast on Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, or SoundCloud. Oh, and please, while you're there, leave us a review. It definitely helps us out. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Paul. All right, let's do this. We're recording live here at Startup Boston Week for the second consecutive year. So I did this last year, which was a lot of fun, so I'm back. And I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz podcast. If you've never heard of the VentureFizz podcast, we're a flagship podcast for the Boston and New York tech scene. So we interview founders and investors from both tech communities. Occasionally we'll get a guest from the West Coast, but they're usually a 50-minute episode where we'll talk about the founder's journey, their background story, what they're building now, and then some general advice questions. Same idea with the investors. We'll talk to the investors about their background, how they got into investing, what they're typically targeting in terms of their investment opportunities, plus some advice from there. But yeah, I'm excited to be here at Suffolk University. Thanks so much for hosting this, Suffolk. It's a huge support for the Boston startup ecosystem, and Stephanie and the whole volunteer crew at Startup Boston Week are phenomenal in their ability to actually pull this together every year. So, but I'm super excited because we have Paul Morville with us today. And I was just gonna introduce you, but we're gonna talk about your whole background. So why would I do that?
Sounds good. Yeah.
So, Paul, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I want to kick off with something that isn't about your background. I do want to talk about something that was very obvious when I was going through your profile, the different research that I do ahead of time. You've built multiple companies. You've been part of teams that were acquired, or you're early. You're building a startup now. So as you've built multiple companies, what are the 2 biggest lessons learned that you'd want to share with entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so as you said, I've started a couple of companies. I'm a scout here for Pillar VC, which is a local VC in the area. And yeah, really there's kind of two things that come to mind, I guess. So one would be, when I really started out in the industry, I was very focused on the idea, right? Like, hey, what are we building? Like, build a better mousetrap. People beat the path to your door, right? And the idea matters, but these days I tend to think about it using the following equation. So I say 60% team, right? Who are you working with? Right? Who's going to help build you this thing? 30% space, right? Because really doing anything, if the wind's not this is very hard what we do, right? And if the wind's not at your back, if you're building it in a space that people aren't paying attention to, that they're not investing in, that sort of thing, you're going to have a hard go of it, right? So 60% team, 30% space, and then 10% idea. And don't get me wrong, like it all matters,
Yep.
right? But the team is really, really important, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of truth to that old saying that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? And so that is the first thing: is really focus on your team, how you're going to build that team, who you're going to attract to that team, right? When you do go in to raise money or talk about the company or whatever, right? Make sure you have that part really nailed, right? Because you're going to be in the foxhole together for a long time as well. So make sure you like them and that you connect as well with your team and so on and so forth, right? So I would say that's kind of the number one thing. The second one, it might not even be worth saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Startups are really, really hard. I liken it to like an emotional roller coaster, right? A roller coaster is done in 90 seconds. If you're successful, your startup's going to take 9 years, right? So it's
Wait, whoa. I thought it was supposed to be a 2-year.
Yeah, well, get ready. It doesn't. They don't. I mean, honestly, like the ones that don't work out can be 2 years, right? But usually, if you're having some success, it's going to be a lot longer, and so you're going to be riding that roller coaster for a long time. I tell people, I tell people this. Like I said, I don't know if it's worth saying in a way because until you've kind of lived it. So that day in, day out, like ups and downs, highs and lows, it's hard to know how that feels. The one thing I tell people though is that as hard as they are, and I've had this experience, when you do get to the other side, right? When you do look back on what you've built, like nothing makes you more proud, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it really is a great experience to be able to look at something and say, yeah, I built that. We built that, right?
Yeah. Yep. So true. All right. Well, let's talk about your background. So where'd you grow up? What were you like as a child?
Yeah, so I was born in England.
Okay.
So
Cool.
it was my dad worked for Pfizer in the south of England, although technically we're really northerners, right? So born in the south of England, moved over to Connecticut when I was 5 years old. My dad got transferred, moved over to Connecticut, and mostly grew up in southeastern Connecticut, like New London area,
Okay, yep.
and then came up to Boston for college. So that was my main connection to the college, and then to the Boston area. And then what was I like as a child? I was kind of nerdy and introverted. I had an English accent. Like I wasn't the coolest guy in the world, right? Like,
So you had the accent when you moved over.
Oh,
'Cause
yeah,
I'm like 5, but you probably didn't pick it up quite just yet. Because
yeah, no. I had a thick English accent.
Are we
which
having
I
tea
progressed
today?
100%. So yeah, I was into Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like it was, I wasn't the coolest guy in the world, but I was a happy kid, and I enjoyed my childhood for sure.
well, you studied computer science at Tufts, but you're also an SCAC athlete. So you're obviously in the sports too, not just Dungeons
So I
and Dragons.
mentioned I was, my family's really from the north of England. My dad was a professional soccer player for Burnley in the
Wow.
in the Premier League. If you follow soccer,
That's amazing.
Yeah, so soccer was pretty important in my family. Like it was a
Requirement.
It was a big focus, and I had great coaching, obviously, growing up with my dad and all that sort of thing. And so we were very very active in soccer in Connecticut in the 80s. And so when I went to college, it was natural that I would play. And in a lot of ways, like you mentioned, there were kind of two things that I was really into growing up. One was sports, and then the other was computers, right? My parents did kind of an unusual thing for kind of the early 80s in that they went out and they bought a computer, right?
I was going to ask, what was your first computer?
Yes, it was an Apple IIe
Yep.
in like about 1983 or something. I was about 9, 10 years old. I still think it's amazing that they did that actually, because I mean, at the time, I mean, the things cost $2,500. Like
Yeah.
a new car was $5,000 at the time, right? Like it was a big investment. We weren't wealthy by any stretch, and so it was kind of a cool thing that in a lot of ways kind of a visionary thing, honestly, that my parents went out and decided to do that, right? To spend their money on that rather than go on a vacation or something like that. And I was always really into building things. I really took to the computer. I spent a lot of time programming as a little kid. By the time I was a teenager, I was writing articles for some of the early computer magazines and things along those lines. And so
Wow.
that was a real passion. And so yeah, it was very natural to transition into computer science when
Did
I
you
went
ever
to
like
college.
write programs that were like shared and bought, like
Yeah,
shared?
yeah. So I used to do. I would sell some of these articles, and a lot of those articles had programs attached to them because
Yes.
they were like hobbyist magazines.
I was
right?
buying your magazine. If it was a video game,
Oh, is that right?
I was probably buying because I wasn't smart enough to actually write the program, but I loved doing it. So I would buy, I'd go to whatever bookstore, buy the magazine, find the game, code it into my Texas
Yeah, you had to
Instruments
type it in,
TI 40
exactly.
with a little cassette, record it so I could play it later.
It was
So
amazing. I mean, it was those things were just very, very sort of, I mean, they were so simple at the time, right, and approachable, and you could just, it was a great thing, and so, yeah, so I spent a lot of time working on that as a kid, and really that's been kind of the defining thing, through my whole career.
cool. All right, well, how'd you get your career started?
Yeah, so I came out I graduated from Tufts nearby in 1995, and it was right. I'd actually spent the year before I graduated really kind of running around the computer lab talking about this new thing called Mosaic, right, which was an early web browser, right, in the World Wide Web, that had just kind of gotten released in I want to say it was 1994ish, and I thought this thing was really cool, right, and so when I was coming out of school, I just really wanted to work on the World Wide Web, right? And so there was a company that was owned by Dow Jones, locally, and they had basically were just starting to build essentially like financial products on the web, which is all totally new, right? Like we all take it for granted now that we have these portfolios and we type in, we track our stocks and all that kind of stuff. But none of that was around in the mid '90s. That was all kind of developed, between about 1995 and 2000. Those patterns, and we were one of the folks that were working on that kind of stuff. And so I joined this company called IDD. It was owned by Dow Jones. Interestingly, IDD, it's interesting when you're seeing these sort of changes in the industry, right? Because, anybody who's kind of doing interesting work tends to attract sort of interesting people, right? And so there's lots of neat alumni out of IDD, the most famous of which went on to found Baidu, right?
So was he local? Like what?
He was in. We had an office in New Jersey, and he was in the. He was in. Was it Livingston, New Jersey?
Okay, got it.
And so we had kind of the two offices and go back and forth. I never spent a lot of time with him, but we were in meetings together and things like
Got
that.
it,
He was
okay.
working on the news feeds.
So this is a New Jersey company.
Yeah, and so
Got
he
it.
said basically, hey, we're doing all this search stuff around news feeds and all that kind of things. I'm going to take this back to China and start a company, and he started Baidu. So it was
Wow.
kind of. There's a number of other interesting companies came out of that. But anyway, yeah. So I was fortunate in that I came in right at the time that Dow Jones was licensing the Barron's brand to IDD to go build Barron's online. And Barron's is this 150-year-old financial brand. Like people, Wall Street has been reading it forever. There's a lot of like just really cool branding. Like there's Clarence Barron's is like a little cartoon character guy, and it's a very very well-known brand in the financial services industry. And so I'm like 22, 23 years old. I'd been programming there for about a year, and they said, "Hey, would you like to come over and be the product manager for this?" Barron's online that we're building. And so I was one of the first 4 people on that project. And we had this 150-year-old brand, and suddenly I'm, the product manager for it, and we're building out basically the Barron's online property, with all kinds of stock trackers and financial analysis tools and all that kind of stuff. And
So did you even know what product management was? I mean, I guess you kind of were exposed to it as a programmer in a company, but it's just not, no one graduates from school with a product management degree. You spent a year as an engineer, now you're in this role, and like, who are you even like interfacing with for customers, because it was so early
I
on?
mean, I might be a slow learner. I don't feel like I knew what product management was until I was 15 years into my career as a product manager. It's a complicated job. And to your point, you don't get especially in the 90s and 2000s, like there wasn't even a lot to read on it. These days at least there's some good books and references and blogs and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, no, I didn't know what I was doing. We were largely, there was nothing to go look at, or like we were inventing new stuff, right? I mean, the web was brand new, right? And so we were largely kind of building functionality that we thought people would want, right? But it is, what we were doing is a quite a long way away from what I would consider good product management these days.
All right, so you went on, you spent a year at New River, which that was a Boston company, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, yep.
Okay,
Yep.
in financial services. Okay, but then where'd you go from there?
Yeah, so at that point, as I mentioned, I had really just spent the last, probably 15 years at that point, if you go back to when I started out on programming on the computer, really just being very focused on sort of the technical side of business and of building software. And I felt like, I would benefit from going back and getting a little bit more of a broader understanding of things like marketing and finance, and just kind of get myself a little bit more understanding of really how businesses operated. That was my thinking at the time. And so I started applying to business schools and ended up going back to get an MBA at the University of Michigan.
Nice. All right, so coming out of Michigan with your MBA, you continue down the product management path.
I did, yeah. It's funny. Most people go back to business school to switch careers, right? So it's a little unusual in that regard. But what had happened while I was at business school is I had started working with Intel architecture labs on basically some technologies that they were looking to spin out of Intel in the form of startups. Now, you got to picture the point in time here. So this is 1999, right? The dot-com boom is absolutely at its peak, right? Everybody's looking to start companies, spin companies out, create all kind, And so Intel was saying, hey, we've got this really interesting, it's firewall technologies, some IPS technologies, like, sort of cool security technology. Let's spin this out into a separate business and let's do a startup using it. And so myself and about 5 other folks from school there started working on that, trying to figure out how to structure a startup out of this bag of technologies that Intel was going to provide. And so we put a ton of work into it. We got really excited about it. We came up with a business plan, right? And we went to go pitch to Intel Capital to get the initial seed funding for this business. And about a month, we were sort of, scheduled, right? Like we were flying out to, they were in Portland. They were meeting as, Intel has a big office and, just outside Portland there. So, we flew out to Portland. All of this coincided with the stock market crashing, the dot-com bust.
Right. Remember it well.
And so Intel basically just said, "Well, time out. We are not doing this, right? It's definitely not handing millions of dollars to a bunch of kids who are still in school, right? In the middle of a dot-com explosion, right? And so, we were disappointed, because that was kind of initially Plan A. So we said, okay, that's not going to work. I started interviewing, looking for jobs, but I did something that was like, as I look back on it, was probably really risky, but it worked out for me. I basically said, hey, look, this security space, even though this company didn't work out, it seems like a really cool problem. It seems like a really exciting space. It's interesting to me, right? There's like cops and robbers and be good guys, bad guys, and it just seemed like a problem that was going to be worth trying to solve in kind of a commercial sense, if you will. And so, I only interviewed with security companies. Now I say it was kind of a dumb idea when you look back on it because I had a spreadsheet at the time. I just put every security company in the U.S. in the spreadsheet and said these are the companies I'm going to interview with. There were only about 25.
Wow.
Right? Maybe 30 in my spreadsheet. So I wasn't like, giving myself the highest target rich, kind of environment.
Semantic.
Yeah,
McAfee.
it's exactly those were two of them. RSA, here in Boston. There just weren't very many at the time, and so, I started reaching out to all these folks, and I got no offers or anything along those lines. But right around the time I was graduating, there was a security company that was funded by Battery Ventures called Arbor Networks. And this happened to be a Michigan company. So I was graduating from Michigan. The founders were both, one was a grad student at Michigan, the other was a professor at Michigan. And Battery had just funded this business in sort of the spring of 2001. And I found the professor on campus, and I went up to him and I said, hey, look, I'd like to come interview in your company. And he's like, well, cool. What do you do? And I said, well, I'm a product manager. And he asked the same question. He said, what's a product manager, right? I said, you definitely need one.
Yeah, you need one of those.
And, long story short, it was, they hired me and I started working there about 2 days after graduation. And just a wonderful experience, right? So Arbor, like I said, got started in Michigan. Within a couple of months, we opened a Boston office. So some really good, sort of sales and marketing, sort of focused headquarters in Boston, R&D in Michigan. I mentioned that, when there were big changes in an industry, companies tend to attract really cool people, and Arbor was definitely like that. I've sometimes talked about it as kind of like a refugee camp for lost founder types, because what had happened is we'd had the dot-com bust, huge contraction. Probably there were a half dozen people there that could have gone and been CTOs of their own companies, right? But considering there were just less options at the time and such, they said, hey, let's work together on this and build a really interesting company. And so Arbor was just a neat place to be at the time. Doing really innovative work in the security space. It was an anti-DDoS company, so these big DDoS attacks, right, that hit sites and take them offline. Arbor was an expert in that, really created that space. For a long time, it was kind of a monopoly, right? 90% market share or something like that. And just a wonderful place for me to learn. So I came in as the first product manager at the company, and I got to build out the product management organization. I got to build the security research team. I got to do the biz dev and do some deals with big companies like IBM and Juniper and Cisco. And when it came around time to start buying companies, I got to lead the acquisition of a company. And then ultimately, when it came time to sell the business, I got to lead sort of the front part of that sales process as well. And so it was really just a great opportunity to kind of learn how startups work at all levels, right? Really get a good opportunity to try a lot of different things with some really, really wonderful people. And I always, the other neat, Arbor, if you look at just sort of who's come out of the company, I mentioned it was kind of a refugee camp for for sort of wayward CTOs or what have you. But I mean, there's probably 100 billion worth of companies that have come out of Arbor, right?
On your LinkedIn, you mentioned something. So Twilio, like founders of
Yeah,
Twilio came
totally.
out of Arbor.
Yeah.
Like okay.
So he was a grad student of Farnham's, who was the founder of Arbor, right? And I remember before he'd even graduated, I don't know if you graduate as a PhD, but had stopped being a PhD student. Before that, Farnham said, "Hey, you should go meet Evan. He's not like the other PhD students. He's different. He's gonna do something interesting, right?" I remember meeting with Evan actually in San Francisco. I was out there for a conference, and he was out there, and we were just hanging out in a diner, and he hadn't decided what he was gonna even do at that point. But I do think it says something for Farnham's ability to spot talent, right? Like,
Yeah.
So Evan went off and did Twilio, and Duo Security. So Doug Song was one of the really early people at Arbor as well. I got to spend a ton of time working with Doug on things. Doug went off and started Duo, which was acquired by Cisco for $3 billion, right? Like, just Deep Field, right, is another one. My company Confer. Like, just cool companies have come out of Arbor.
Well, all right. So that's perfect. So Arbor was acquired. You were starting a company coming out of your B school, worked for Arbor, great experience, different roles, leadership. Now you're really armed to build a company, like to actually be like in the founder's seat.
Yep. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. I mean, coming out of Arbor, and the other thing I got to do after Arbor was a year on the M&A side for Danaher. So Danaher bought Arbor, and I'm not an M&A guy, right? I like building things. I'm much more of comfortable on that side of things. But I got to spend a year on the buy side, right? Just sort of looking at what makes companies attractive and that kind of thing as well. So that was interesting. And so I basically spent about a year at Danaher, and then I moved into Northbridge Ventures and started working on Confer and figuring out what to build. Yeah.
All right. So what was Confer?
Yeah, so Confer was basically, you'd mentioned Symantec and McAfee a second ago. What we were seeing was essentially the cloud having potential, right, like real potential for playing a role in security solutions. Not so much in terms of protecting the cloud, but which is certainly is true, but more in terms of being like the way you deliver the security solution, right? So
Like SaaS.
Exactly. Things were becoming SaaS based.
This is 12 years ago.
This would be 2011.
Sorry.
Yeah, 2010, 2011.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah. And SaaS was starting to become pretty dominant in certain parts of the enterprise stack. Security was definitely not one of them at the time, right? We were looking at it, and the general kind of perspective of a security person is like, I can't trust like the cloud to this kind of this kind of a product to be deployed in the cloud. And so the dominant way of delivering security software at the time was very much like on-prem, traditional client server, Symantec McAfee kind of stuff. And so we said, hey, we think that we could do a better job of protecting this infrastructure and make it easier to manage and use and configure if we took sort of some of these techniques that we've used in sort of traditional endpoint security and back-ended it with a SaaS, essentially. And it was kind of like that was kind of the initial insight, right? The other thing that we were interested in was what happens after the attack, because I also think the security industry was becoming a lot more aware at the time that no matter what you do, attacks are sometimes going to happen. And then the question is like, how do you respond and have the visibility to understand what happened and all that kind of stuff? And so we said, hey, if we can basically deploy this endpoint security technology, back-end it with a SaaS, gather all this information about what's going on these endpoints, right? We could use it to better protect those endpoints, and we could use it to better respond when an attack does happen. And the big concern, right? I mean, the big kind of, whenever you start a company, there's usually one or two big technical things that kind of keep you up at night, right? There's usually something that you're like, I don't know if I'm right about this,
Right.
right? I hope I'm right, you know, but I might not be. And for us, it was definitely, would people embrace the cloud for, would people embrace SaaS for this kind of a product? And it turned out they did, right? And so, Confer, basically wound up in a space that was just perfect timing, honestly, for transitioning. It took a few years, right? But we started in 2012. By about 2014, 2015, it was very clear that everybody was just going to rip out all their old, client server, traditional endpoint security products and replace them with SaaS-based ones. And, we were very well positioned in that regard. And so, turned out we were, I wouldn't say we didn't know if we were right, but it turned out that was a good bet.
So you ended up getting acquired by Carbon Black, which is a Boston company.
Yeah. So, round about, I guess it would be 2015 or so, the market was starting to shake out a little bit, right? Like we knew it was going to be a big market. Like we knew that this was something that was going, it was happening. We were also winning way more deals, right, than we were losing, despite the space being fairly competitive. And so we were feeling really, really good about that. What we weren't feeling as good about was just the sort of funding scenario, right? Because what had happened is, we had raised $8 million in our initial fundraising, and then we raised another $17 million in our B round, right? Which ordinarily would be like pretty good start for a company. Yeah,
normal numbers back then.
Yeah, we felt good about it. With one exception, our number one competitor, CrowdStrike, had raised $200 million at that point. Those guys are fantastic at that side of things. They did a really, really good job with that. And so we were sitting there and we were saying, hey, look, we've got the best product in an exciting space. We are seriously outgunned in terms of ability to build, a go-to-market engine that can compete with CrowdStrike. And we made the decision. We were approached by Carbon Black, who said, hey, look, we have a fantastic customer base. We've got a great brand. We, a tremendous company, by the way. We have found ourselves in a situation where a lot of what we've built is much more client-server, right? And we know that this transition to cloud is happening, and we think you have the right product to take us there. And so, long story short, we said, yeah, this sounds good. We put the two companies together. Everybody makes fun of acquisitions, right? Like a lot of founders make fun of acquisitions, right? Like they like the...
In this market, I'm sure they'd be very pleased.
Yeah, that's true. It is. It's always they don't make fun of them until after they happen, right? But yeah, this was a fantastic acquisition.
It was a good fit.
It was really, really great. It was a great experience. We went in as basically a 20-person company. Carbon Black viewed it as very strategic, right? And really put their money and their effort where their mouth was, right? And so we went from 20 people to 600 working on that product in the 3 years I was there.
Wow.
We definitely moved it to basically the forefront of the portfolio. They put me in charge of running all the products for Carbon Black, right? We built a whole team around around this product, and these things are not easy, right? Like when you go into a company that's already doing $100 million a year, right? You say, oh, time out, we're all switching. Everybody's over here now, right? We're investing in this. We were doing about 5 or 6 million at the time as Confer, right? So we say, hey, everybody, we're going to move all the folks that are working on that $100 million worth of business over onto this $6 million, right? It was big change management and the company did a fantastic job with it, right? Really just kind of like stuck at it and then, invested and just, worked with customers to manage through the transition and all this kind of stuff and really just wonderful experience. These days, obviously, Carbon Black IPO'd, kind of off of that product in 2018, and then sold to VMware for a few billion in 2019. Really, I can't say enough good stuff about Carbon Black. It was a great experience, and something that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, well, like what did you learn from that experience, taking a company from 0 to 1, raising capital, revenue, building a
Yeah.
category, to then joining a larger company and
So a lot, but I'll highlight two things. So one would be gets back to your question a little bit about product management from earlier and how I mentioned I never really knew what it was until I was later in my career. And one of the things that definitely to that end I took away from that experience is really the importance of systems for running organizations at scale,
okay.
right? I think prior to that experience, I would have been much more focused on, are you, understanding customers? Are you converting, really more on the individuals, right? Like, is this a person who gets it, right? Who can make things happen, et cetera, et cetera. When you start to operate at scale, you really have to think about, hey, it's equally important to put people inside of a system that consistently produces the result you're looking for, right? And it's complicated, right? Because you have a lot of different people involved, right? You've got engineers, you've got QA, you've got designers, you've got product managers, you've got product owners, you've got all kinds of constituencies around them, product marketing, sales, support, et cetera. And you really have to think about, hey, how do we staff teams? How do we set up processes? How do we set up cadences and ceremonies and things like that are really going to consistently yield positive result and forward momentum and innovation for the company. And so these days when I sort of think about the process of building products at scale, I very, very much think about, okay, right, like what is the most efficient and innovative and highly productive ways of structuring the organization and the processes that are going to produce innovation and winning in the marketplace. So that was definitely one of the big things, and it was a really good sort of playground to experiment with different things there as well. Because, like I said, when we came in, like we were doing so much change management, right? Just moving people around products and things like that. And so we really got an opportunity to set up, kind of re-engineer the whole kind of R&D product development process while we were there. So that was really cool. And then I think the other thing is definitely related to that in terms of just kind of change management. When you do want to change an organization at scale, the human side of it, right, and managing people through that process and getting them from point A to point B without sort of minimal amount of sort of concern or frustration or whatever, right, dysfunction, that becomes a big part of the job at scale, especially if you're doing it right. I think a lot of organizations tend to sort of get into a rut, at some point, and they don't really change too much, and everybody's happy with that, but it doesn't necessarily produce the result you're looking for. When you think about what we did at Carbon Black in terms of going from essentially, moving an entire, $100 million customer base from one product to another in a 2.5-year period, right? And moving an entire R&D organization from working on one product, which, by the way, I mean, R&D folks, I mean, who are good, they love what they're working on. Like they don't want to stop working on it and go work on something else, right? So all of that change management is a big part of those jobs, and so that was a really interesting takeaway from that experience too.
All right, so what are you working on now?
Yeah, so I left Carbon Black in 2019, right around the VMware acquisition, and took a month or two off to kind of figure out what I wanted to do, and then I started interviewing for various jobs at the time, and I wasn't sure yet whether I wanted to start another company or go get a job. And so I interviewed for a bunch of different jobs, and I got a bunch of offers, but nothing that grabbed me. And then I started interviewing for a venture capital job at a VC firm. And it was a funny experience because I went through the whole process. After every interview, I'd tell my wife, "Oh, I think I screwed that one up. I'm not going to get it." And I was really upset about it, right? I really wanted the job, and to my surprise, after the whole experience, I mean, I had tons of interviews. I had to take an IQ test. I had like this massive background check. Everything, like they're very thorough, right? And they made an offer, and they made the offer on the Friday. And I said, "I'll tell you on Monday." And I thought about it over the weekend, and I said, I'm not done building companies,
Wow.
And so I turned them down on Monday, which they were surprised.
You're like,
I was
"What?"
surprised. It wasn't the greatest. But at that point, I stopped interviewing. I said, this is crazy. And as I mentioned earlier, these days I'm so focused on team. And so I called up two of the best guys that I'd ever worked with in the space. I said, hey, you guys want to start a company? And we started working on what is now Parrot AI in kind of 2020 timeframe, just talking about ideas and things along those lines, and what was changing in the industry and things we'd be interested to work on and things along those lines, and started honing in on what ultimately became Parrot AI. And so, to answer your question, these days I'm co-founder and CEO of Parrot AI, and that's what we're working on right now. Yeah.
All right, so what's the product?
Yeah. So the original idea for the product actually came from a conversation I was having initially with my wife. I was out at Neshoba Valley Winery, which is a a winery nearby, and I was saying I was pushing her because we were brainstorming on different ideas, things I could do, and I remember I said to her, "Oh, your ideas that it was probably an obnoxious thing to say." I said, "Oh, these ideas are all too small. I want to do something really big." And she said, "Well, my wife is a user researcher, okay, like she does usability testing and things like that." And she said, "Well, if you want to do something big," she's like, "what would be cool is if you took every user interview that I'd ever had and you turned that into a composite person. And I could ask that person questions, right? So, it's like I could interview this sort of AI composite version of all of my customers." And I said, "Now that's an interesting idea, right? Like, maybe we could do something there." And so I brought that concept back to Rob and Tyler, my co-founders, and we started talking about that. And what that ultimately, kind of manifested into is Parrot AI. And so what we do is we record conversations. All right. So it could be a conversation like the one we're having right now. Actually, podcasters use our product quite a bit. But the dominant use case right now is typically meetings. So any kind of meeting, whether it is a kind of just an internal meeting, a customer meeting, could be a keynote that the CEO is giving, really doesn't matter. But any kind of conversation or any kind of meeting, we will record the audio and the video for that meeting.
You do the video too.
We do. Yeah, we capture the video. That was actually one of the things we're really interested in, is that we believe that video is going to play a much bigger role in businesses over the next decade. We're on these video conferences, we're showing things on slides and things along those lines. So this idea of being, much more multimodal, right? Sometimes what you're interested in is what's in a slide. Sometimes you're interested in what I'm saying, et cetera, or maybe facial expressions. So yeah, capture the audio, capture the video. We transcribe the audio, so we have a transcript. We know who said what and all that kind of stuff. We capture slides, right? So we know what was presented and that kind of thing. And then we take all of this information and we get it into basically a page, right? So you can almost picture like a wiki. So it's an editable page. It's got all the content, summaries, things like that from the meeting, action items, all that kind of stuff. But it's editable. And then what we do is we partner that with an AI engine. So you can work in the page, you can work with the AI, you can ask it to do things for you, you can ask it questions. So a typical use case would be like, let's say I am a marketing manager. And maybe my company's releasing some new features. So I do a 1-hour interview with the head of product to understand, okay, hey, what is this feature? How does it work, right? Like, how should I be promoting it, et cetera, right? That recording that interview is recorded, right? And so in Parrot, and then what that marketing manager can do in that case is come back and work with the AI to do whatever they need to do after that interview, right? So that might be I need to write a blog, right? Or I need to write some collateral, or I need to brainstorm on some panel topics, right? That we're going to have at our customer conference or whatever. And so if you think about Parrot, basically, you're in a page, editable page. You can take notes, change things, move things around. You've got your AI companion sitting next to you. It knows everything you talked about in that meeting, and you can turn that conversation into a result really faster than any other tool out there. So
Very
that's
cool.
what we do.
Yeah, my head's spinning around all the different use cases that I could use it for. So, so this market's growing quickly, right?
Yep.
And there's obviously, I don't know if it's an exact competitor, but there's a lot of companies out there that are doing the transcribing, definitely, right?
Totally.
So how, like on your website, you say you have over 10,000 customers. So what's your go-to-market? How are you differentiating yourself?
Yeah, so I'll tell you. So I'll take the second part of that question first, and then we'll talk a little bit about kind of who's using it and that sort of thing. So yeah, so basically, we have never been super interested in the note-taking part of what we do. I think we do it very, very well, by the way. Certainly that is something that people get a lot of value out of in our product. But as I mentioned, for us, the thing that is really valuable, right, the real high ground, is in turning that conversation into whatever you need to do next.
Yeah.
Right? Most people in companies, they live in this loop of have a meeting, have a conversation, and then go do something, right? Hopefully, right? If you're just having conversations, which happens at some companies.
I was going to say, a lot of companies just have conversations and don't do anything.
Yeah, exactly. Well, hopefully we can help with that. So the idea here is like you go from meeting to producing something, meeting to producing something. And Parrot is really your partner, your AI collaborator, right, for that second part, which is, hey, I got to go do something now. And so, what we hear from customers is that basically the thing that really sets us apart from everybody else out there is just that you're not taking your transcript and pasting it into ChatGPT or something like that, right? And then you're like working in ChatGPT, and then you're taking the results and you're pasting that into like Google Docs, and then you realize, oh, actually it was the slide I wanted. Where can I got to go back to the video recording to see if I can find that slide, right? Like in Parrot, all of this is accessible to you. And so for anybody who's doing kind of creative work after the meeting, right, it's a huge asset. And so that is really where we kind of plant our flag, is around collaboration. It's around, content creation, and I think that the note-taking is just a means to an end for us. And so, yeah, to answer your question, that is translated into, if you think about kind of like who uses our product, marketing is our number one user. For obvious reasons, like this is just the world they live in. Conversation generates stuff, right? Like that's what they do. So marketing is our number one user. We have a lot of sort of consulting and professional services type users as well for similar reasons, right? If you think about what a consultant is doing, they're always just going from client meeting to, produce something back and forth, right? Very steep learning curve oftentimes for them because they're not experts in their client's business typically, right? And so, this ability to pull all of that information from the client, get it into an AI to work with it is really something that's very valuable to them. R&D users are a big use, which is no surprise. It's kind of who we initially built it for, right? Being that ourselves. People write product requirements documents with it. They attach, it's like, hey, I got to go write a user story based on what, I just brainstormed with the product architects on the next release. Like, let me go write a user story based on that discussion and, just pull that out of Parrot and paste it right into, Jira or whatever, right? So, those are kinds of who's using the product. And then to your point, I mean, these days, it's hundreds of thousands of users, right? Like, we have a free service and a paid service, and within the sort of the free realm, many users at this point, and we just started charging last fall, so we're just about a year now in sort of charging and been building the business on that side as well. So.
And like, how do you acquire customers? Is it word of mouth? Like, a marketer is telling another marketer, and then the other marketers on the team all start using it?
So there's kind of two primary ways that we sell today. Well, I guess the third is starting to emerge as well. So initially, what we were interested in is what we call product-led growth. Okay, and so for folks that are not necessarily familiar with that term. That is like if you picture how maybe Slack sells or used to sell as an example, right? There's a free offering, right? People try it out. If they like it, they're typically going to get asked to upgrade to a paid offering. That's all in the product itself. You can put in your credit card and become a paying customer that way. And very often with products that work well for product-led growth is usually very often a little bit of a viral kind of acquisition component to it as well. So it works really well for things like Slack as an example, because that is a collaboration tool, right? You can use Slack by yourself, but you can be very lonely in that channel, right? It works much better when you have people in the channel with you.
Right.
And so typically, what Slack found early on was that they were getting something like 8 users for every user that they acquired, basically, right? And so acquire via a product-led growth-based model. We have a very similar system, and we are a collaboration tool, so it works well in that regard. So basically, what happens? We do both sort of search engine optimization and some search engine marketing. We look for folks that are interested in transcribing meetings, sharing meetings, turning meetings into content, etc. Right? We present ads, or we present our search results. They come into the site. They are presented with the opportunity to have a free trial of the product, and generally we give them all of the functionality for a week or two while they kind of get familiar with what it can do for them. And then they go one of two directions. Either they go to the free plan, so there's always a free plan. There's always going to be a free plan. It's a little bit more limited in terms of the amount you can use the product and things along those lines. Or you can choose to become a paying customer, and lots of folks do that. And then within that spectrum, we've got a personal plan. We've also got a team plan. So generally, those users are picking, hey, I want to use it in my company as part of a team, or I just want to use it as an individual. So that's the product-led growth, kind of approach. We have a enterprise kind of go-to-market motion that we attach to that as well. So if you are a larger company, if you're a larger team, a lot of times they have unique needs, right? Like they have to do a trial, they have to, get consensus across the company to purchase the product. Usually there's a security organization involved that needs to get comfortable with the product and all that kind of stuff. I'll come back to that in a second. So we have an enterprise, offering there as well, and that is typically, kind of like more of a traditional kind of SaaS enterprise sale. We do a trial, and folks kind of decide whether they want to purchase it at the end of the trial. I mentioned security, which is very often a big part of that decision process for an enterprise, right? If you think about what we're building, like we are literally capturing all of the IP, right, that people are talking about in a company. And I mentioned earlier that is our background, right? Like, I spent 20 years in security prior to doing Parrot AI, and so one of the big insights, in addition to all the stuff I talked about, was that security was going to be really, really important in this space. And when we think about that, we think about two things. We think about the security that the company needs, right? Hey, keep my IP private, right? The second, though, is the individual privacy needs of the people who are participating in these calls. They're sharing this information. Most of the time when I'm in conferences these days, you're in my house, and then I mentioned we're on video, right? So it's like, there's video going on behind me, there's conversations happening. We have always felt that the individual who's in that meeting should have a lot of control over what happens to that video, to that audio, to that transcript, and so on and so forth. And so, one of the neat things about Parrot is that we do find, we have a very sort of unusual and reasonably well thought out privacy model. Individuals who are in the meeting, they can redact things if they choose to, if they regret something or they want something that happened on video or whatever, right, removed from the record, they can do that, right? So, and this all dovetails with a lot of privacy laws and your GDPR and all this kind of stuff that's going on in the industry, giving consumers and individuals a little bit more control. We've gone beyond that, right? And just have given, really tried to find our philosophy or our design principle was we always wanted to build something that and by the way, we are all sort of paranoid security veterans, right? Build a product that we as security veterans are comfortable using in our own meetings. Right, and that's what we built.
So, as far as I could tell, you haven't raised any outside capital unless it just hasn't been announced.
We didn't announce, yeah. So we raised in 2021, right, when we got started. Accomplice was the lead on that. Pillar is institutional, and then another investor is Legion Capital, which is Mike Viscuso, who's the founder of Carbon Black, actually, right? Okay. So, and then we have a bunch of really awesome angel investors in the business as well.
And Accomplice did Carbon Black.
Yes, that's exactly the connection. Yeah, and so I knew Jeff from Carbon Black as well. He was on the board at Carbon Black, and then a bunch of other people we've talked about are in the business these days as well. So. I'd mentioned earlier, Farnham, who was the founder of Arbor. Farnham went on to be the president of Carnegie Mellon. So he's the current president of Carnegie Mellon. He's a fantastic career, wonderful man. He's an investor. Evan Cook, the founder of Twilio that I mentioned, he's an investor. There's a bunch of, Ted Julian, who was one of the early co-founder guys at Arbor, is an investor, a local guy. So we got a bunch of just fantastic, angel investors in the business too.
All right, so I think this is a question I've never asked a founder because I don't think I've ever run into this scenario. Why do you choose not to announce?
So mostly, I don't know. I think that there are kind of two parts to that, I guess. One is we just never. This is just more of a values thing. We just always want it to be about the customer value that we're building. I just don't. Maybe I'm unusual in this regard, and might be the wrong perspective. Probably is, but my perspective has always been that just keep the focus on what are we doing for customers, right? And a lot of the venture stuff on that side of things just feels a little bit like noise to me sometimes, So there's definitely a little bit of a values aspect to it there. The other reason is just that, I guess sometimes it's just easier to sneak up on competition than tell them you're coming.
The competitive reasons, you're just you're not stealth, but you're trying to fly under the radar, which I've seen that with some companies.
Yeah. That definitely, that's definitely a big part of it.
So what makes a great product manager?
Yeah, so I think that the number one thing I focus on is sort of a passion for customers, right? It in my mind, it's always been sort of a customer research job first. Um, Ultimately, it is about understanding what is going to delight people and get them to part with their money, which is not an easy thing to do, right? And so I think that it's sort of an easy and obvious thing to say, but the reality is that is not what happens in most organizations. Like in many, many organizations, product managers are pretty insulated from customers in a lot of ways, right? And it can be much more of a sort of bureaucratic kind of role in some organizations. And so I'm always looking for somebody who is much closer to customers and very comfortable interfacing with them, interacting with them, understanding them, has a passion for that. So that is definitely the number one thing I would talk about. I think being a strategic thinker is important. I think that being, having like a really good regard for the sort of software development side of things is really important as well. You do kind of live in that world, right, between customers and between sales, and then you've got to kind of show up at in front of the engineering team and tell them what you think they should build, right? And that is not that's not a small responsibility, right? These folks work hard, and there's generally a lot of them, and there's one product manager and 10 engineers, and they're going to go off and spend the next 3 months working on something. Like, you better know what you're talking about, right? And so I think having an appreciation of that and an ability to evangelize and convince and work with people to get things done is really important too.
All right, 3 apps you can't live without. Can't be
Yeah.
Parrot, obviously. Slack, Gmail, or Calendar.
Okay. Well, you take you're not going to let me have Parrot. That's terrible. But yeah. So I'll tell you right now, Customer I/O is one product I'm really enjoying. Customer I/O is not that exciting in a way, but basically it is like the email marketing and customer data platform that we use. And so it's really good for kind of all the marketing stuff that we do, right? And then we track all of our just sort of marketing information. We almost use it like a
CRM.
yeah, exactly. And it's just a very well-designed product. It delights me every time I kind of go in. Like, so many of these products frustrate you. It's like they may be great products, but a lot of times as a user, they're tricky. And I think Customer I/O does a very, very good job of kind of doing what we need it to do, and kind of not getting in the way of we're just so busy, and it just kind of works. And so that's we feel very good. You make a bunch of product decisions when you build a company like this, and we have felt very good about that one. The other one I will mention is really ChatGPT, and I probably use it like a lot of people. I use it for a lot of different things, but the main thing I use ChatGPT for right now. I had mentioned, right, we have this product like growth-based go-to-market motion. That process lives and dies on the data that we collect, right? They got all of our visibility into hey, are we hitting our numbers? Are we, are customers having success in the product? Are they failing in the product? Are they having challenges? Are they using this feature? Are they using that feature, right? Are they converting? All this where are they? All this kind of stuff is fed into our sort of product, right? And then we do in a Jupyter notebook using Python, we do basically data science on top of the data that it's kicking off. And so, some people might do that in like an Amplitude or a Panda or something like that, right? But we just wanted this to be something that we really, again, where the tool doesn't necessarily get in the way of what you're trying to do. And so we do it basically using Python and Pandas in a Jupyter notebook, working off of log data. What that translates into is a lot of code, right? I started out writing all of that code myself in Python, but when ChatGPT came out, I've gotten into a mode now where ChatGPT does most of the programming for me, right?
Yeah.
Which I'm feeling my programming skills like atrophy as I'm doing it. I don't know if it's a good thing, but it actually does a fantastic job of it. And so, anytime we have a question about what's going on in our business, right? Are we growing here? Are we, having issues there? What might be going on? Is there performance? Whatever it might be. I'm generally going to my Jupyter notebook. I got ChatGPT in another window, and I've got that, kind of writing code to help me analyze what's going on with customers, make sure we're doing the best we can, right? Build the best product we can.
I agree. It's creeping into my world too, more and more and more, and it's so powerful. I mean, it just saves you time. It's efficiency.
Yep.
So, well, Paul, thanks so much for walking us through your background story. Obviously, all the great companies that you've been a part of and what you're building now with Parrot AI, and all the great lessons learned. Thanks so much for sharing your story.
Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
And thanks to the team at Startup Boston Week for having us here, and Suffolk University. Appreciate it.